Hey, Dennis here, and welcome to the third installment about the shadow boxes, scenes, and shadow box books that I create. This time around, I'm going to show you 4 more of my displays and talk to you a little bit about how I find the very cool items that I use in them. This first shadow box that I'm showing you was created by me way back in 2010 while I was living for a short while with my son Dennis Jr. and his pal Nate up at Tawas, Michigan. I no longer had this scene as it sold shortly after it was completed and brought in $40. I created this based on an early 1900s print which showed the irony of a sea monster reading a newspaper which was telling about the mysterious airships that were frequently seen at the time. I loved the print. You see, in the late 1890s and early 1900s, many people were seeing these mysterious airships, which today we call, of course, flying saucers or UFOs. But at any rate, I made 4 copies of the print and began cutting out pieces to build up in layers, creating a really nice 3D effect. There were 4 different layers, and the effect was great. Adding to that effect of depth, I painted the glass on the inside with various shades of gray, which looked like a swirling fog. It was a shadow box I would not have minded having around for a while, but it sold almost as soon as I put it up on the internet. I forget exactly what state it went to, but the buyer commented on how much he and his family loved this piece, and comments like that always make me feel really good. This shadow box measured 8.5 inches by 11 inches by 3 inches deep, and I actually found this print in a book at the library in Tawas and was able to purchase the book. I'm always looking for items that will make an interesting display, and you never know where they're going to be found. I try to connect in some small way many of my scenes to my Time Hopper series of stories, which, by the way, you can find right here on my YouTube channel. These stories are set in a fictional village of Small Lake in northeast Michigan. And this next scene is at Small Lake during the winter of 1919 and has a number of very interesting elements in it. Whereas most of my shadow boxes can be hung on the wall, this one is too deep, and I display it on a shelf. For the time being, this one remains in my personal collection because I have not put it up for sale. This entire display measures 10 inches by 13 inches by 6 inches deep. So let me tell you about the scene and some of the pieces in it. There are 2 glass cars, which are both Avon cars, probably from the 1970s, I think, is when Avon was really big into those type things. Stupid me, I forgot to write down the make of the 2 cars, but they are the era where they can be in a 1919 scene without violating the rules of time. This scene is set at the entrance to the Small Lake, Michigan toboggan run. And the little boy in the background with the skis over his shoulder is from the 1940s and was made in Japan, which is marked on his base. And then the little boy towards the front carrying the firewood is from the 1980s and, though unmarked, was more than likely made in China. There are 3 paper figures also in the shadow box, and all were cut from a 1950s children's book that was in pieces, as I felt all right about cutting these pieces from the remains of that book because it was in such bad shape. And it's a way of preserving a little part of that book anyways. But I am not a great sculptor. But when I need something which I can't find elsewhere, I will get out the polymer clay and try to make something to supply the need. In this display, the snowman figure was molded by me and then hand-painted. I think it fits in well with the rest of the vintage pieces in this collection. Now on the ramp at the top in the foreground is a metal cat. And as I've said, I find things all over the place to use. I'm always watching the ground to see what might be there. And David and I were out riding bikes a year or so ago, and we stopped for a rest behind this big old storage building on Michigan by the railroad tracks here in Saginaw. And as I sat down, this little metal cat was laying there, and I knew it had to come home with us. The blustery background in this scene was hand-painted, of course, and the flat rocks on the side of the ramp are also rather unique, as they are not rocks at all, though they are quite old. These are pieces of antique plaster which I found by digging under the house we lived at 1015 Stevens, again here in Saginaw. That house was built in the 1890s over the litter from another house that had previously been on the site. In this old plaster you can actually see horsehair, which was used commonly as a binding agent to strengthen the plaster. These pieces would have been used more than likely on the inside walls of the house, much as we use drywwood. Now I can't think of what you call it. Drywall, thank you. The drywall that we use today. I had built this scene originally as part of my miniature museum, but when I disassembled that and put it in this format, I think it works out better this way, and that I built this on January 10th, 2015, and this was a really fun one to build, and is a scene I wouldn't mind stepping into. Next up is another unique one, and this is relating to the Algonquin Native Americans who once called Saginaw, Michigan, and the area surrounding it, their home. The Thunderbird was a very powerful entity to these people, and he protected them against many agents, and especially against Mishipishu, who liked causing problems for the ancient forest dwellers. In this shadow box is what appears to be a head of the Thunderbird in profile, but it is actually not a relic at all. It predates man living in Michigan by a very long time. It is a concretion which probably has a fossil embedded inside, as they usually formed concretions, that is, usually formed around something else. This concretion was found by me near the Shiawassee Wildlife Refuge, again here in Saginaw, where there's a lot of shale of various colors, black, gray, red, and so on, and many have fossil impressions on them. So this red shale concretion would date back to the great coal forests of the Pennsylvanian era in ancient times, when it is believed that Saginaw at that time was actually near the equator, and the shifting of the plates and such. Now we're up here where it gets nice and cold like it is tonight, but whereas science says it's from the shifting of the plates, I believe that the shifting of the plates was due to the flood of Noah's day. But anyways, the print in the background on this particular shadow box was found in a book whose name I can't remember. And this shows an Iroquois longhouse and braves in their woodland home. The Iroquois were actually from the area of New England, but various battles brought them into Michigan during the Middle and Late Woodland eras. If you want to know more about that, please see my video on here titled The Battle for Skull Island. This was built into an oak frame, and I found the concretion during the summer of 2014, and the shadow box was built around that same time. This measures 9.5 by 11 by 3 inches deep, and I really honestly do find things laying all over to build into interesting shadow boxes, shadow box books, and various other scenes. For the time being, this shadow box remains in my collection, as I've never offered it for sale. The last one I'm going to show you today is not a shadow box, but is a freestanding display. I made this for David's half-sister, Lee. This was made featuring a doll that she had stored in our garage, and the box it had been in got wet and ruined. And not wanting the doll to get ruined, I took it inside the house to work on. And I began with a wooden base to which I attached the doll, and then filled in around her with dried flowers and weeds that I often collect during the summer and dry, and I think this was in 2013. To this I added on the base an antique red brick, which was made here in Saginaw in the 1880s, and I also included a green depression glass candle holder, which somewhat matched the pale green on the dress that the doll was wearing. I wanted to do something really special for the background, and I think I accomplished that by using the rounded bottom of an 1880s stoneware crock, which I had incidentally dug out of my backyard. And in front of that, and from the same era, I attached half a plate, which is in a pattern commonly known as flow blue, very collectible. And you see in this way, even broken odds and ends that I have come across while digging for relics can become a cherished collectible. When I presented Lee with this, her face lit up, and she was so happy. Even though the doll is not old, I believe she said her grandmother had given it to her, and she loved the setting, and of course this made me, the scene maker, very happy. Now, I've mentioned again quite a few times that a lot of the items I use are actually dug up. Now, this next series of photos shows me in a hole in the backyard of our home, again at 1016 Stevens, where I was digging out a very large whiskey flask that was in amazing condition. The seam line in the bottle showed that this was probably produced in the late 1860s and 1870s. The yard and under the house was a treasure trove of items dating historically back as far as the 1860s, but also prehistorically to late woodland, middle woodland, early woodland, and archaic periods, as I found many prehistoric artifacts there, some really nice ones and some very unusual ones. But this particular flask I did not build into a scene, but it still netted $45, as dug. I do now wish, though, that it would have been kept in my collection, but at that time keeping a roof over our heads was more important than having an antique whiskey flask. That's about it for this time, but soon I'll bring you another in this series and show you more of my creations. I love building these items, and I love seeing them please other people. So thanks for stopping by, and until next time, God bless.